All right, YouTube, you're a coffee maker fans. This is a really long video, but I think if you stick with it, you'll be glad you did. I'm going to show you how to tear apart a F7, not this F9 here. It's just a prop for the moment, but we're going to tear apart and dismantle and overhaul a F7. It's a very long video. I suggest you watch the whole thing before you start the process, though. So let's get to it. All right, if you're gonna overhaul your Jura, I recommend you put down a towel on your work surface and get a turntable. You don't have to have a turntable, it just makes it easier. These are the tools you need. You don't have to have a spud, but it's helpful when you take the sides off. A T10, a T15, and a T20 Torx, a Phillips head screwdriver, a magnet tool to retrieve screws from inside the machine, your oval head key for your 4 oval head screws on the back of the machine, needle nose, some picks. You don't have to have a set of picks. I even have 2 sets of picks. You could just use one ice pick. But since I have these tools, it makes it easier. You could do it without the turntable, you could do it without the pick set, but pretty much you want all this other stuff. If you have the turntable, you don't need it, but it just makes it easy. You can sit down, work on this side of the machine, spin it, work on the other side of the machine, go back and forth. It's a lot easier than physically getting up and down to go from side to side or having to spin the machine around. It just makes your job easier. Step 1 is to remove the 4 special screws with the special oval head screw bit. You just take that one, that one, that one, and that one off. And then at the front top, there's a T15 Torx screw here, and there's one here. Take those out. Once you get those 2 out and the back 4, the top will come off. So just for a quick demo, I already took the 4 back screws out, but on the turntable, I removed this T15. All you got to do, spin that thing. Look how easy that was for me to get to the next one by using that turntable. Now, the other thing, get a magnetic parts cup. Put your screws, your circlips, your hairpin clips in a magnetic parts cup so you don't lose them. Once those 6 screws are out, the top comes off. So that's easy. Turn the machine. You're going to take off this side plate. And the way it comes off, it goes that way. It goes straight back. And you can work something in this crack right here to start popping it back. I start at the top here and try to work that back with my spud. And then it pops back and off. Now, at reassembly time, pay attention to these little tabs here and here. I don't know if the light's good enough to see them or not, but there's a tab here and a tab here on this side piece that engage in some slots at the bottom of the machine. And there's one there and there's one there. And this tab right here fits in that slot. So when you put this back together, you got to make sure to get these tabs in these slots, here and here, before you try to push it forward. So you've got these tabs engaging these bottom slots, and then you've got these tabs up here that go along these tab clips here. But the way these side pieces come off is they go straight back. So same thing again on this other side. You can start at the top, work a spud in there, start sliding that down. And once you pop this front that way, this thing's going to slide back and out and off. And again, same thing with these little tabs that engage these little slots down here. When you put it back together, push those tabs into those slots and then push it forward. So it didn't even take 5 minutes to get the machine open. That part's easy. Now this is the brew group that you're going to remove. And it's easiest to get it out if you take out this coffee chute. It's held in place by a T10 screw, which right now on this machine is missing, but it goes right here. But you can take that screw out, and then this coffee chute, you can take it straight up. Now, pull it up. Don't try to pry it up with a screwdriver, because this plastic is going to be old. This machine's probably at least 16 years old. Don't want to pry it with a screwdriver. Pull it up and remove that chute. It can be kind of tight, and it makes a mess when it comes out. But that's going to make it a lot easier to get the brew group out. Also keep a shop vac handy, and as you're going through this process, take a paintbrush and hold your shop vac nipple, spout, or whatever the hell you call it, the end of your shop vac, and clean all this coffee grounds out of there as you go. Next thing to do is to take this coffee inlet piece out so you can get the brew group out, and it's held in by one T15 screw right down here. You just remove that screw, take it out, and then you'll be able, I'll use my magnet here to show why I like to use it. Now you've got that screw out. This piece right here has a clip right here and a clip right here to hold it in, and you just lift it straight up. Now if you want to remove it completely, you've got to take loose this water hose that's underneath it here, but it's flexible enough you can just pull it out to give yourself a little more working space to get the brew group out. So I don't usually disconnect that tube. Now this is going to be a little jumpy because I got to hand hold the camera, but we're going to take out the brew group, this big contraption here. And typically when you take these apart, you're going to see that it's held on both sides. There's this brown plastic thing that goes up and down this side, and there's an analogous bit over here that goes up and down this way. But you have to take out that bottom T15 Torx. This one you can leave alone. You'll see why in a minute, why you don't have to remove that one. And most of the time there isn't one up above, but I put one up there when I rebuilt this machine last. I'm not sure why I did it. Now the other ones are on the other side of the brew group. You can see one, see if I can point it out, back there. You have to reach through there with your Torx driver to get access to that one. And then typically there won't be another one in the middle or up at the top. There's the top one where it would be. So there's a plastic piece here that's analogous to this plastic piece right here. And then the hole here, there's a corresponding hole here, which oftentimes doesn't have a screw. This one you don't have to remove, and usually there's not one over here at that position. I'm not showing it too good. And then, but at the bottom there is, you need to take that one out. And when you loosen it up, you know, it might fall down below, but it's easy to get if it falls. Or you can pull it out with your magnet. Now I'm going to see if I can put the camera back on the tripod. I'll show you how I like to use my magnet. I'm going to take out this top screw. Like I say, most of the time that's not there. But you loosen it up, and this goes for any other screw. You loosen that up, and once you feel it's loose, you can just touch it with your magnet and pull it out like that so you don't drop it. And then you can pop it off of there and put it in your parts cup. Now I'm using my iPad. I really should be using an iPhone. It'd be easier to manipulate. But up here at the bottom front of the brew group, there's the brew group. At the bottom front of it, you see that hole there? It's offset from that hole above. I've loosened up the brew group already, but normally there's a screw there, right in front of that. You see that little wire clip? That's part of the drainage valve. Normally there's a T15 torque screw right in that hole there at the bottom of the brew group. For some reason, when I reassembled this last, I didn't put it in. But you would take that one out, and then you would check to see if there's one, you know, up here, or if there's one up above, where am I? There. But there can be three of them, a top one, a middle one, and where are we? That bottom one down there. But most of the time when you take these apart, you're going to see there's only a bottom front one and a bottom back one that's holding the whole thing in place. Typically, they don't have them up top. But anyway, once you take those out, you've got this side of the brew group loose. But now you've got to turn the machine around because that brew group is also secured by two more screws that might be a little hard to see. But there's one there right in the middle of the frame. You see that button-headed torque screw. And underneath of it, there's another one. If I can get it in view somehow. Let me see if I can see how to show it. Oh, there it is down there. Let me get that in view. Where's that encoder? There it is. Right above the encoder. See if I can get a light on it. There's that button-headed screw up hiding up under there. There you can see it. I'm going to try to, it's just underneath that hose. You take those out, that one, and then that one up above, up there. I'm having a hard time controlling my, there it is. You take those out with a T20. Let me see if I can get a better view of that. So there's the top one. You know, it's right behind that drive pinion there, that top T20. You're gonna loosen that and take it out. Use your magnet. This is where it's really helpful to have the magnet so you don't drop these because they're kind of deep down back in there. And if you drop them, you might have a little trouble getting them out of the bottom here. But that's the top one. Now hopefully you can make it out, but I've got the T20 in that bottom one, which is just by this thing here called the encoder. Well, right above the encoder, you can see I've got the Torx in that T20 right there. So you take this bottom one out, and there's this top one up above. And once you get those two T20s out of there, now you've got all the fasteners undone, and you'll be able to get the brew group out after you disconnect this piece of tubing right here. Now I always do this with a headlamp on so I can see in there. That's your other screws that hold the brew group, but there's two T20 button head screws. Those are the T20s that you took out. And when you're pulling those out, be careful. Don't stick a T15 in there and strip that out. Because believe me, if you do that, you're going to have a world of hurt, and I've done it. So make sure that when you come to this side of the machine, you're using a T20 to get those button head screws out. Don't stick with your T15 that you used on the other side of the machine. Yeah, this side you use the T15s. you know, to get these ones out. And then along down there. Get your T20 on this side because these are machine screws. Don't strip them out. Now the brew group has a hose coming out of it. We're looking in the front of the machine, you know, after taking out the drip tray and the used coffee ground tray. We've pulled all that out. We're looking in, you know, that slot where all that would go. And that's the brew group in there. That's all the brew group. And coming out of the brew group is a hose that goes over to the boiler. And in order to get this brew group out, you have to disconnect this hose from its connection at a junction point up by the boiler. I'll show you that. There's where the hose comes through the side of the machine, right back there. And then that hose comes up and connects to this junction valve right here. You have to disconnect it right here by pulling out that little hairpin clip, and then you can pull this hose back this way. And once that hose is free, you can pull the brew group out from the other side, and that hose will go out and go through that hole and pop out the other side. So you disconnect it here by pulling out the hairpin clip, and you can do that with a pair of needle nose. So here I'm going to pull out the hairpin clip with my needle nose. Try not to drop it or lose it, you know, secure it in your magnetic parts thing. And then you're going to take this hose and pull it that way and pull it out. Now you'll notice right now there's no O-ring on this hose. There is an O-ring up in there. Up in there. You're going to have to retrieve that O-ring to replace it during this rebuild. So you're going to have to reach up in there from this side with a device. You might want to try to get your eye down here so you can look up in there and get that O-ring out of there, because you're going to replace that. Now that this hose is free, it'll pull through and go out the other side when you pull out the brew group. So you've got all your fasteners loose. You got that water pipe that goes to the boiler disconnected. Pull that pipe out of the spout. You can move this just a bit and take this brew group up and out of there. You can reach around to the other side and help guide that water hose so it'll come through that hole there. That's the hole that the water hose comes through. And as you're pulling the brew group out, you can guide it. Now we can see where those fasteners were that weren't so obvious before. They were holding the brew group. There's a threaded hole there and there. And over on this side, there's one there and there. And also down below, there's a threaded hole there that sometimes on some of the machines, there'll be a screw that goes through there into that hole. Now I'm going to show you a little closer look at the brew group here first. Now the next thing we're going to do is dismantle the brew group. But before we do that, I'm going to take this coffee scraper off. When you put that back together at the end, remember that coffee scraper goes on this side of the machine. But I wanted to just show that this side of the mounting, which was hard to show before, there's a top screw hole, a middle screw hole, and a bottom screw hole. And typically when you're taking it apart, this is the only one that's going to actually have a screw in it. This one can have a machine screw, like it does here on the other side. There's a machine screw that you don't have to take out. So when you're taking this thing apart, if you see a machine screw there on that middle hole, just leave it alone. There probably won't be a screw up here. There probably will be one here, and there might be one here. These were things I was trying to show earlier, but now they're more evident with the thing out of the machine. So look for a screw there, look for a screw there. There probably won't be one there or there. And then we already talked about the ones on this side. So now this drive piece comes off. If I can figure out how to get it off of there. This piece comes off of the brew group. You just slide it off. And now we'll proceed to dismantle the brew group step by step. There's that machine screw I told you don't have to remove it, and now you can see why. The machine screw just holds this slider to this driven gear. Now that we got the thing apart, I can show you where those T20 button head screws went. They went right in there. That's where they went into, on that slider part. Now you're going to have to remove this water hose at some point to do the overhaul. You could have actually done that earlier in the process. You could have looked in through the front of the machine, and this is how this was assembled when this tube was going through that hole in the wall of the machine. But that comes up out of there. You can pull out that hairpin clip, pull that out. Again, you don't see the O-ring there because it's in there. So I'm going to have to pull that O-ring out of there and replace it and put a fresh one on here when we get to the rebuild. You can either pull this out now or you can leave it on there, but I'm going to go ahead and remove it now. And then I'm going to secure that hairpin clip in my magnetic parts thing. Now I've got another video on my channel that shows how to take these side plates off. You can look at that if you want to and then come back to this video. But basically there's 4 clips that hold this side plate on here. It's a clip here and here, here and here. And these 3 are easy to undo, but the one that's by the drainage valve, this thing here is called the drainage valve. You're going to disassemble that later. But to get these side plates off, you have to undo these clips. And 3 of them are easy to get to. But the one that's by the drainage valve is a bit of a trick to find. So if we flip this over, you can see there's a tab right there. You can pop that loose. And there's a tab up here. Now the tab up here is easier to get at if you move the brew group or the cup that way, because this is interfering with your ability to get to that tab. So you can just take your wheel and roll it to move the cup out of the way. So I'm rotating it there. Now that pulled that way a little bit. So now I can get to that tab and that tab very easily, and pop that up, pop that up. And so these 2 tabs are loose. That one's not. Let me get that one. There. And then this tab over here, again, if you put the cup just in the right position, you can get at that and pop it up out of the way. So now I've got that loose. There. And then this one over here, just pop that up and pop that loose so you can get that plate, pulled away there. There. So those 3 tabs are loose. That tab, and that tab. This tab, you got to figure out where it is. Well, here's how you do it. Put the brew group like that. Flip it up on its head. See if I'm in frame here. No, I'm not. Sorry about that. Now, the 4th tab, is hiding in here where all these coffee grounds are built up. I'm going to grab one of my picks here, this one, and there's a slot in there. You can't see it until you get these coffee grinds out of your way. But there's a slot in there that you can push in there, if you can find it. It's hard to find it with all those coffee grounds in there, but clean away these coffee grounds here and here. You can see that in there. And you'll find that slot, and then you can poke in there and pop that tab loose. And same thing over here. Now, when you take this side plate off, only take off one at a time. Don't take them both off. Take this one off, set it aside. Now the next thing you're going to do is we need to take off this top piece. And that just pops off real easily. You just pop these corners like that. I heard something happen that I showed you on the other video. One of my bushings just popped out. But anyway, you pop that up and you're going to take that loose. There. It wants to go back every time you pop one loose. Get that off, and I'll show you what happened here, what should happen. You take that side plate off like I just showed. You will have already taken the top cap off. You pick this up, and what happened, what shouldn't have happened, when I had this piece on here, I should pick it up and get that bushing right there. Don't drop it, don't lose it. You want to get that bushing and put it in your parts tray. Now there's another bushing just like it right underneath it here on the other side of this pin. And what you can do is just gently pull up this gearbox and get that bushing out of there. There it is. And then you want to secure that. The thing you don't want to do is lose these bushings. So if you take both side plates off at the same time, and then you pop both of these pieces off at the same time, you're going to have these bushings on these pins, and if you're not aware they're there, you might drop them and lose them. So take off one side plate. That would be on there like that. Take the side plate off. Take the guide piece off. Get that bushing. Don't lose it. Pop up the gearbox, pull the other bushing out, secure it, don't lose it. Then come to the other side and pop this side plate off and do the same thing. Now what you can do, before any of those steps in the previous clip, before you take anything off, disassemble any of these pieces, is take this thing to the sink and spray out in that area and get all those coffee grounds out of there so that you can see in there where that little slot is that you're going to put your ice pick or your whatever you've got. You can even get a little screwdriver in there into that slot right there. Hopefully you can see that. And the same thing, there's that little slot over here. I don't know if you can see it in there, but that's that little slot. And you just poke in there and you can get that tab loose. And it might be easier to see it if you get all the coffee grounds out first. But if you're going to get the coffee grounds out first, be sure you don't have taken anything apart, because you don't want to loosen up anything or lose anything. So clean out the coffee grounds, get in there. Look at my other video on my channel. I've got a playlist on Jura MD that says Jura coffee or something like that. But if you look in that playlist on my channel, you're going to see a separate video that discusses exactly this. Now I'm going to do the other side plate. So I'm going to get that tab, and that tab. And then to get this tab up here, I want to get that brewing cup out of my way, like I showed before, by rotating the dial, and get this thing to move. You might have to cycle it through, most of its cycle to get it to move over. Actually, I can't get it to move now because I took the guide piece off, so it's not going to cycle, but I might be able to do it manually. No, I can't. That's all right. I can still get in there and get that tab. It's just a little more difficult, to get in there and do it with this thing in the way. I can get it if I work at it. I'm going to do that off camera, but I'm going to take off that tab and that one, and then I'm going to get in to the slot in there and get that tab. So I was able to reach in there right beside this plastic piece and get that tab and flick it up and get that loose. There's the tab right there. So even though this was kind of in my way, I could still get it. So I got the 4 tabs loose, got that off. I'm going to pick up this guide piece. There's that bushing I don't want to lose. And I'll reach under there and get the other one out. I kind of dropped it down in the gearbox, but there it is. Get it from underneath of there and don't lose that bushing. Put it in your parts thing. Now, once you get the side plates off, this part here is called the drainage valve. It just slides out. And, part of the overhaul of this is disassembling and cleaning this and putting new O-rings where all the O-rings go. And by the way, that's the wrong O-ring. When you get your O-ring kit, you got to pay attention. There's a bunch of O-rings that are all the same in your O-ring kit. The ones I get from eBay, they're orange. But in your O-ring kit, you're going to find 3 separate black O-rings that are different. 2 of them are a little bit larger in diameter and kind of thin. And there's going to be one odd man out. It's going to be a black O-ring. It's different from the other 2 black O-rings. And that other black O-ring, that odd man out, is the one that goes here on this nipple. Don't put an orange one on there, because that ain't right. Now I went to the sink and cleaned this off, cleaned all the coffee grounds out from in there. And you can see what I said about using an orange O-ring. It's all shredded. I put the wrong O-ring on there when I last overhauled this. I didn't pay attention to put that one specific O-ring that goes on this nipple on the drainage valve. So look at your O-ring kit, make sure you put the proper one on there. Don't just grab a generic orange one. Now let's take this drainage valve apart. This is the nipple. There's a hairpin clip there. You can remove that. If you want to, you can go to the sink and clean all the coffee grounds out of here, but get that hairpin clip onto that side. Get rid of that O-ring. I'll do it off camera so you don't have to watch me fight with it, but take that O-ring off. Get that hairpin clip out of there. Flip this thing over. There's another hairpin clip. It might go on either side. It doesn't matter which side it goes in, but over on this one, it's on this side. Get that hairpin clip and take it out of there. Be careful you don't shoot it across the room and lose it. I noticed I got my head in the way a couple times in the previous clips. I'm sorry about that. So you got that hairpin clip out. You got that hairpin clip out. You can pull this up and out. There's an O-ring that goes on there, and it's down in there. I don't know if I'm showing that in the camera or not. You see that orange O-ring in there maybe? I can't see the monitor, but it's in there. So if it's not on here, remember you got to pull that out. That's part of the overhaul. It's changing that O-ring, changing that O-ring. There's a couple in here. Anyway, pull this piece out. You can come back here. This part should come out now. If I remember how to do it right. Maybe I have to take this piece out first. Now, this part, there's a valve in here with a spring pin that opens and closes the valve. I think there's a magnet that operates this valve right here. And in order to get this piece out of this assembly, you have to push this spring and get this piece pushed aside. I'm kind of struggling with it here because I'm doing it on camera. I'm trying to keep out of the way, but you push this spring down and get this piece I think I'm going to turn the camera off so you don't have to watch me fight with that. But basically, you're going to pull that thing this way and hold it this way a little bit so you can take this whole cylinder assembly and pull it out. Hang on. I'll do it. All right, here's how you do it. Just push it from here. Just push it. Like that. And then hold it with your finger. And then you're going to pry this assembly out of there. See if I can remember how to do it. You want to try to keep this thing out. You could stick something in there to hold it. There we go. So that's going to hold that while I get this piece out. And I think you just lever it out. Get my spud back in there to hold that while I work on getting this up and out. There, see, it's moving. There it comes. You just lever it out. So we've taken apart the drainage valve assembly from its, housing. And so again, there's another O-ring there that you're going to change out. That O-ring winds up being in this opening right here, like that. You're going to change that O-ring, you're going to change that O-ring. We're going to use the proper O-ring here, not put an orange one and get it all shredded up. Might as well flick that off there now while I'm thinking about it. I don't mind using a sharp tool to remove the O-ring, but obviously when you put them back on, don't use a sharp tool on an O-ring. Take that one off. Yeah, I'm not going to fight with it on camera. So now you can pull this piece out. And you're going to clean that all up, shoot water through it, get all the openings in there cleaned out, change out that O-ring for the proper one. Clean this all up, get all the coffee grounds out of there. Now this piece comes apart. And there's two big O-rings that fit in here. You pull that out, and you pull that out, and then this piece will come off. If I can't get it with my fingers, I might grab it with my needle nose if I can find where I put them. Here they are. This piece comes out. Okay, so this piece was in there. This piece was in there. Now, there's a big orange O-ring in there on both sides. Those are going to come out. Pay attention to how they're oriented. These things have two sides to them, a flat side and then this kind of open cup side. And this open side, this cup side, when you replace it with a fresh one, goes into the valve. And you can just slip it in the opening there and then, push it back in with this thing when you're reassembling that. Because you want that thing in there square and flat. You don't want it cocked. But remember when you put the new one in, the flat side faces out toward you, the little cup side faces into the valve. And so there's one over here on the other side also. We're going to take that out. These are going to be replaced. And there's one in there. I'm going to take that out because that's going to be replaced. Okay, so that assembly's free. All the O-rings are out. I don't think there's an O-ring in there, is there? No. Taking out the O-rings. You're going to clean that up, And then get your new O-rings here, the cupped ones, insert them properly, reassemble everything exactly the same way you took it apart with fresh O-rings. I'm going to go clean this up and put fresh O-rings and come back. So you can get different O-ring kits on eBay. The one I get has the circlips for the pivot shaft. In case you lose those, we'll talk about that later. But the key thing here to remember what I said before about there's a bunch of orange O-rings that go in a lot of places, but there's 3 unique black ones. And these 2 larger diameter thin ones go on the riser tube. We'll get to that later. That one, the one I called the odd man out, that's the one that goes on this nipple where I had that orange one before. So don't put one of these orange ones on here. Make sure to get the correct one. Of the 3 black ones, get the smaller one, and that's the one that's going to go on here. Now typically they'll send with you this, some lubricant to lubricate all these O-rings, and you can use that, of course. I always keep a big jug of this around. I use it on my swimming pool connections. I use it for all kinds. I got a meat slicer. I just keep a big old giant tub of sanitary lubricant around so that I can lubricate the O-rings. These are for the pistons. We'll get to all that later. But to reassemble the drainage valve, we're going to be using these 2, that one, and several of these. We'll get these out of the way. Put them aside for the moment. I don't need those circlips right now. Actually, I'll put all this back in the pack. I know I'm wasting your time here. Just get all this stuff out of the way so we can just work on the drainage valve that we're going to put back together. So the first thing to do is to take the nipple and get a little bit of lube and put it on there, and also put it on that black O-ring and get that correct and proper nipple on there. And if you look at my other videos, you'll see where this nipple goes. It goes into the bottom piston. Now I gotta go shut up the dogs so we can continue this video. All right, so we'll take the main body of the drainage valve here. We're gonna put one O-ring in there with the flat part facing out. Put the other special O-ring on this side with the flat part facing out. Grease them up with a little lube first. Okay, I'm going to stick this one in this side. You want to get it in there, going in there square. You don't want to get it all cocked out of position like that. And if you have, I'm being very careful here with this metal tool that I don't damage that. But anyway, you got to get that in there flush and square. It might take you several tries to get it. But once you get it started, if you can square it up, then you can push it home with the drainage valve piston. And then look in there and be sure it's down there, it's bottomed out, and it's square. And you do that also again for this other one on the other side. All right, so time to reassemble this thing. I've got the new O-rings in the body there. This piece has a little tab on it that fits in a little slot right there. So you put that together like that. This piece doesn't have any indexing, you just stick it in there. Just push that in. And then want to put the nipple back together first. And I put that fresh, correct O-ring on there with some lube. Now we need to put an O-ring on that part of the nipple with a little bit of lubricant. Doesn't take much. Just get it kind of greased up. See if you can get it on there. Probably would have been better if I'd have done this beforehand. I'm going to try a little trick here. I should have done that before I put that together. But now I got my fresh O-ring there, which is going to seat inside of here. So I'm going to put that back in there. That tab fits in that slot. You got to compress this spring, and then that tab goes in that slot, that tab goes in that slot. Make sure the piston is, correctly seated so the actuator can work. And now we can go ahead and reassemble this thing to the brew group once I overhaul the brew group. But the drainage valve is done. Now it's time to further disassemble the brew group. Spin the ring off. The ring has little flat spots on one side, and on the other side it doesn't. And these little flat spots go up when you put it back together. So you pull out the ring, pull out the top, this is called the top piston. You're going to pull that out. Inside of the top piston there's this thing called a riser tube, which you just twist and pull out. And be sure you don't lose the spring plunger on the end here of the riser tube. And this riser, let's take that out. Let's not lose it. At the top of the riser tube and at the bottom of the riser tube, there's O-rings. And it's those other two black O-rings that we showed before. I put them back in the pack. But remember, when you clean the riser tube, irrigate through the riser tube, to take those two black O-rings off, the bigger ones that are a little bit thinner, and replace those. Put some lube on them and replace them. And you're going to take the upper piston and remove this O-ring right here. You can get it off. Clean all that up. Use a Phillips head screwdriver, clean the gunk out of there, to take this screen out. And if you have access to compressed air, you might want to use that a little bit later in this process. But anyway, you take that screw out so you can get that filter mesh out of there. And you're going to go clean that. And after you clean it, hold it up to a really bright light and look through it and see that all the holes and perforations are clean. And if not, try to get all those perforations cleaned out. You can use compressed air if you have an air compressor. You can use a toothbrush. But do your best to get that screen really clean before you reassemble it. And then clean all this area. That O-ring's kind of slippery. Let's see if I can dry it off and get a hold of it. Dry my fingers off and try to move it where I can get it out. And I'll just pull it out with a tool. There. So you're going to clean that all up, put a fresh O-ring, clean out this channel, get all that crap out of there, put a little lubricant in the channel, and then lubricate the heck out of the fresh new O-ring when you put it all back together. So that's what you're going to do with the upper piston. And then remember, put the new O-rings on the riser tube, and don't forget to put the spring and ball valve back together. All right, I've got my upper piston clean. I got my new O-rings. They're not exactly the same size. The bigger one goes on the upper piston. The smaller one goes on the lower piston, which we'll get to later. I got my riser tube cleaned, and I cleaned out my spring and ball valve. These are the two O-rings that go on the riser tube, here and here. So we're gonna get a little lube, grease them up, put them on the riser tube where they belong, which is not always easy to do because they can be a really tight fit and hard to get on there, especially after you've greased them up. I got that one on. I'll put this one on after I grease it up a little bit. This one's a little harder to get on. You might have to struggle with that a bit to get it to get down there, especially after you've oiled it up. In fact, you might want to put it on dry. You'll get a better grip on it, and then you can grease it up after. I'm going to do that off camera because I'm going to have to fight with that a little bit. I don't want to waste your time. I took that O-ring off, dried it, dried my fingers, worked it back on there dry, and then I greased it up. Now, inside the cup there's a little cylinder down in there. Don't forget to put your ball valve back in place. And if it wants to fall out, you can hold it in place by just putting a little dab of grease on the spring there. That'll probably hold it in place, provide just enough friction to hold it in place. And so you're going to put your riser tube back in there, and then you rotate it counterclockwise so it fits in these slots. And then turn it into place. See if I can get that done. There. I had to push it down a little. But you get those arms into those slots and then rotate it clockwise so that that piece is at the end of the travel of this slot and this piece is at this end of the travel of this slot. So you rotate it that way. So now I can put a little grease in the channel for the O-ring. Not much, just a little. And then get the fresh O-ring, the big one, and grease it up. Again, you could do this dry, but this is an easy fit. So even if you got it greasy. So that's back together and good to go. That's the upper piston. We'll set that aside. Actually, it's not back together. I got one piece left. I got to put the filter back. And I took that filter, I scrubbed it really good with a toothbrush. Then I took it outside and held it up to the sun. I got myself in the shade, but I held this thing up in the air out in the sun and looked through and saw that every one of those holes is open. And a couple of them were not. So I blasted it with my air gun on my air compressor. So all those little teeny tiny holes in there are open and clean. Those holes are so small, you know, if you think you might try to pass a wire through there, you probably don't have a small enough gauge wire anywhere around your place that'll fit through the tiny bit of those, the tiny size of those little holes. So if you have access to compressed air, use it. If not, just scrub the hell out of it the best you can and try to get it clean. Anyway, I'll put that back on there with that Phillips head screw. Now, as a side note, while you're going through this whole process, throughout this whole machine, remember a lot of times you're screwing a screw into plastic. So when you're putting a screw in, as soon as you feel it hit home, stop. You don't need to crank the hell out of it. You don't want to strip threads in plastic. You'll have hell to pay trying to repair that. Anyway, that's all back together and ready to go. And be sure to look at that other video I told you about called Jura F7 Overhaul Tips. It's going to say almost all the same stuff here, but you might pick up a few little golden gems. Next thing we're going to do is finish disassembling the brew group. And there's a pivot pin here that this pivots on. This whole assembly moves up and around that track, up and down. It's really tight right now because this needs to be lubricated and cleaned. I can't even move it with my hands. You'll see later, and once this is all cleaned up, I can easily cycle this thing all the way around the track, you know, in its normal fashion. There's a pivot pin there. You got to remove that, and it's held in place by little circlips. Hopefully that's showing on camera. There's a circlip there and a circlip there. And you have to pop those out. And when you pop them out, don't just reach in there and flick them out, because they're under spring pressure. You'll probably lose them. That's why on this kit of O-rings, they give you spare circlips, because they know people are going to lose them all the time. But if you're careful, when you're prying that circlip out, put one finger or your thumb in there to control it, so that as it pops free, you've got it under control and you don't lose it. I saw in the last clip there, I didn't angle that up to the camera good enough. I'm going to pick this up and angle a little better. That's the circlip there, and there's another one there. But you're just going to get in that notch and flick that clip out under control. So I popped the circlips free. There they are. And that's where they were. Right there. And now this pin will just pop right out. And now you can get the gearbox and the lower piston out of there. Now I found out this one's really tight. Once you pull the pin out, you can, flip this thing around and get it aimed this way so you can get that piston out. This piston is really tight, I just found out. You can reach around into the gearbox, and at the bottom of that piston, there's a geared peg. Hopefully I'm pointing this at the camera, but there's a little brown rectangular geared peg there, and you can push on that geared peg to get the piston out. There's the geared peg, right there, and it fits into that gearbox, and I just pushed it out. So now we can clean that up, change out for a fresh O-ring, and I'm also going to take all of this out and clean it all up. Now, when you take this apart, if you looked at my other video, you saw this. This gearbox has a little curved cutout right here. And that curved cutout needs to be on this side of the assembly. This is where the drainage valve goes. You don't want that curved cutout, after you put this back together, flipped over so that that curved cutout's over here, by this area. You want that curved cutout, facing this part here that's more flat. Because you can put that gearbox back in there either way. So don't put it in backwards. Now I'm going to pull out the cup. Now the same thing with the cup. That only goes in here one way. Like that. If you put it in like that, your machine's not going to work. Because this little curved part right here engages this little cylinder right here, and that little cylinder right there engages the nipple on the drainage valve. So when you put all this back together, and I showed this on my other video, all these parts need to go in here with the right part facing that way and the right part facing that way. And I'll show that when I reassemble it. I'm going to go clean all this up. Actually, you can pull this gearbox out of here. Usually I have to kind of fight to get it out. But if you diddle around with this gearbox, you get it out. And then you can clean all this stuff up and reassemble it. So I piddled around with it and finally got it out of there. I'm going to go clean all this stuff up, and then we're going to come back and reassemble it. These gearbox gears, there's 3 of them that kind of interact. You can get in there with a bottle brush and scrub them sideways and rotate them up and down to get them to move and get all those gears clean. If you have a bottle brush, it's about the right size to fit in there. I'll go clean it all up and we'll come back and put it back together. Every step of the way as you're going through this disassembly, you're going to have coffee grounds all over the place. So when you come back to reassemble with clean items, get all that coffee grounds out of there. You don't want to incorporate that back into your reassembly. I took all these parts to the sink. I washed them, cleaned them, scrubbed the living daylights out of those gears. with my bottle brush. That's my bottle brush that I used right there to get that gearbox clean. I took my turntable, wiped off all the coffee grounds. There's coffee grounds around here, so I put a fresh, clean surgical towel to get this reassembled and not incorporate coffee grounds. So now we're going to put this thing back together. So when I put my gearbox back in, I want this little curved cutout right here to be on this side of the assembly. Where the drainage valve is ultimately going to go is right here. So I'm going to have to put that back in like that, so that that curve is on this side. It takes a bit of dorking around to get it in there. I'm going to do that off camera because it always takes me 6 tries to figure out how to do it, but you can get it back in there. All right, once you spend half an hour figuring out how to get the gearbox in there, with that little curved part, you know, on this side, then you want to take the gearbox and aim it this way, you know, toward this area, so that you can put the cup back in there. Now remember, on the cup, this little curved cutout right here has to go on this side of the machine. Don't put it in like that, because that that little cutout engages this cylinder on the lower piston. So get your cup oriented properly so that that semicircular cutout's facing this way, and you can slide your cup back in there like that. Before you did that, you could have done this. Take some lube and smear it around in there. Now I've got my piston ready to go. My lower piston, I've got the new O-ring. It's all cleaned up. I've got the new O-ring. It's lubed and ready to go. Now again, this cylinder on the lower piston has to be on this side of this assembly, because that piston has to engage the nipple on the drainage valve, and the drainage valve goes here. So this piston needs to be over here so that that can engage like that, because that's where your water flows. The water flows this way, comes out this nipple, goes up through the piston, and there's a little teeny hole, but the water flows that way, and this has to engage like this. So get this piston in there properly. And when you put it in there and it starts going down into the gearbox, you got to piddle around a little bit to get it going. But once you get it in there, be sure that you've got the piston shoved all the way down to the bottom of the gear. I'll push that gear this way so I can get this in there easier. I got the little cylinder facing that way. Now I got the gear peg engaged in the gears, and I'm going to push that all the way, push it all the way, so that this cup is all the way up, that piston's all the way down. If you don't do it, when you get this thing all back together, this thing won't cycle properly. When the piston comes up here, it'll pop out. So push that piston all the way down. Then you can rotate this assembly back into position and put in your pivot pin. Okay, so I've rotated my assembly so that the gearbox is over here, and I've got the pivot pin holes lined up, and I can reinstall my pivot pin and reinstall my circlips in those little grooves. I'm going to clean this thing off and make sure it's got no coffee grounds on it. I'm going to slip that back in there, jiggle it into position, push that back in, wiggle it around until I get it to pop through on the other side. Okay, and now I can put my circlips back in the grooves. And you want to be careful when you do this, because these circlips are under tension. And as you go to try to push them into place, they're going to want to tend to pop off. So you have to be careful in how you do it. It's not easy. It's a really hard push to get those circlips back in the groove. I'm going to do it off camera so you don't waste time watching me fight with it. So I got the first circlip on, and now I can tap the pin all the way down so that I can get access to the second groove. If I don't push the pin all the way in, I won't be able to get that groove. And now I can put the second circlip. People call them different things, E-clips. I learned circlip, 30, 40 years ago when I was a motorcycle mechanic. But anyway, I'm going to go ahead and put that other one on there. See if I can shove it on there. There. Okay, so I got both circlips in position. Now, I'm going to make sure again that that lower piston is shoved all the way down. All the way down to the bottom of the gearbox. Now I should be able to cycle this with my bare hands all the way through the entire brew group. Can you hush, please? I'm going to push that up. There's the piston. If I hadn't pushed it all the way down, that piston would pop loose. It would pop up into this cylinder here. Go across. Click. Down. Back across and click across that spring thing there. Click. Back up. As I go up to the top, the piston's not popping out. And when I go sideways, the piston can move that way. If I didn't push that piston all the way down, that piston would catch the edge of here. So you got to cycle this through a couple times with your hands and fingers to make sure it cycles properly and freely. You don't want to put it back in the machine if you haven't done this first. So, that's good to go. Now the next thing to do is to put the drainage valve back into place, which just slides in. If I can remember how to do it. It just slides into position there. Actually, this nipple goes inboard so that nipple can engage that piston right there. That's the bottom of your lower piston. That's why it needs to be on this side. And that also lines up, it's going to line up with the riser tube on the upper piston. But anyhow, so I got the nipple inboards, and that little tab right there engages that slot right there on both sides. Make sure I got it engaged on both sides. There. So now I've got my drainage valve back in place. Now, the next thing to do is get the bushings back on these pins. This pin and the other side of the pin in there. I want to get the bushings, but we're going to do one side at a time. So I'll get a bushing, slip it there. I'm going to pick this gearbox up gently, and as I do so, I'm going to slide that bushing under there so it engages the other side of this pin. I hope I don't have my head in your way because I'm bending down so I can watch myself do it. You might have to fiddle around with it like I'm doing here. But you just gently lift this up just enough to get the bushing under there. Just gently. And then wiggle it around till it engages the bottom of that pin. I think I remember from before that it's actually easier to do it from this position, if I remember that right. Let me try that and see. Try it again. I'll lift this up gently. Slide that bushing under there. Engage that pin. There. After you do it a few times, you'll get faster at it. But make sure you get that bushing engaged on the opposite side of that pin. Then you can put the next bushing on top of there. So this side's got its bushings. And then you can go ahead and reassemble the rest of it. Now we're going to take the upper piston. Make sure I'm in frame here, yeah. And again, you want to make sure that the riser tube, as you put it in this assembly, the riser tube is on this side, the same side as the drainage valve. So we're going to put it in with that riser tube over here. That's the upper piston. Slide it down in there. Now, we've gotten our two bushings in place. We don't want to lose them, so we're just going to keep working on this side. We're going to take our top ring that has the little flats right there. Those flats go up. So we just kind of give that a squeeze there and get that ring going. Now, when we set this piece into place, that goes into that boss, and this slot goes across that wheel. So you got to get that relationship between this wheel and that lined up just right so that this tab will fit in that boss at the same time that that ring will fit through this slot. And before I did this, I put the brew group, I just arbitrarily put it in this position so that this slot here will engage that bushing, readily. So that's back together. Now, I don't want this to come off and lose that bushing, so I do this whole side all at once. Next thing to do is put the plate back on. Now, when you put the plate back on, the side plate, the way it works, it helps secure the drainage valve, and the drainage valve has a little up and down action to it. So as you're reassembling this side plate, you're kind of going to jiggle the drainage valve up and down so that this tab on the drainage valve engages this slot in the side plate. I'm going to set that together, and I'm just going to work that until I feel all the tabs go. I didn't feel that one go. There. Now remember, I said that this tab is really hard to find. We talked about that earlier in the video. I'm going to look up there and look in the slot. I don't know if I have it on camera or not. I can't see my monitor, but let me stand up here and see if that's in. Oh yeah, that's in frame. So, I verified that that tab did go into there. And plus you can tell because it's flat down. So that side's done, and I didn't lose my bushings. Now I come over to the other side and lather, rinse, and repeat. Take the bottom bushing, lay it down in the track. I'm going to pick the gearbox up just a tad, just enough to be able to get that bushing under there. And diddle around with it till I get it to catch. And like I say, this is easier than it looks. You just want to make sure you visually watch in there while you're doing this. I've got my head down so I can see under there. And there, that bushing got captured by that inner pin. it's in place. Now I'll take my other bushing, put it there, do the same thing. We're going to take our guide plate. We're going to set it into position so that that bushing goes in that slot and that tab goes in that boss and my ring goes in my slot. And I can, you can jiggle the ring just a bit to make it drop into position. But my side plate's down. It's caught properly, the bushing in this slot. And then again, now I can go ahead and put on the other side plate. But by doing one side at a time, I don't lose my bushings. When you take it apart, as I said earlier, if you take both side plates off at the same time and then pop both of these things off at the same time, and if you don't have it laying down, you're holding this thing up in the air somehow, you can flip those bushings off and never even notice that you did it. And you may not even know that these bushings even go in here. I went over that in great detail in that other video. And now I can put this side plate back on. Just get it lined up and pop the tabs into position. Make sure that, again, that that tab goes into that notch. Just give it a little jiggle. Pop, pop, that popped, this popped. So this is back together. Oh, now it is. Whoop, no, it's not. Look at there. Let me get that back together. There, there, there. Yeah, be sure they're down. Make sure there's no gap on your side plate as you go around. And you can see here's the tab and tab and the tab and the tab and wherever that other tab's up there, but you can't see it. Anyway, that's back together. Now I had manually cycled that brew group around to make sure that it went all the way around its cycle. Now I'm going to do that with the ring. So you can look in here and work your ring and make sure that as you go around, that cup is going to cycle properly. There it comes. And when I push it this way, now it goes down. And when the piston gets to the very bottom of its travel, and then this cup comes and gets lined up concentric with this opening, like that, that's called the home position. Piston's all the way down. The cup is over on this side, facing the hole here in the brew group assembly. That's the home position. That's how you're going to put this thing back in the machine. Just like that. Now remember, that riser tube is on this side, and this top cap, that is what engages the riser tube right there. So that's got to be on this side when you put the cap back on. And the cap, these corners just snap into these little grooves here. I don't know if that's in, gotta stand up. Yeah, that's in frame. So there's these little grooves here, and that cap just, these little corners snap into those little grooves. And I'll make sure that I've got this thing lined up so it goes on to the riser tube there. Snap that corner, that corner, that corner, that corner. Okay, so the top cap's back in place. Now the next thing you have is the used coffee wiper thing. And you got to make sure you put it on this side of the unit. Don't put it over here. This is the side that faces the front of the machine where the drainage valve is. And this is where it scrapes the coffee off into the used coffee bin. This thing has little slotted tabs here that go up and engage underneath here. So you slide that up, Then after you slide that up like that, this little top bit, you just shove that by spring force onto the top ledge right here. So put those things into position on the little bottom ledge there. There we go. So I've got these, try to hold it in position here. Yeah, I got those things in position. And now all I have to do is snap this top lip. I'm trying to get it all done. It's easy to, there, now I'm going to snap, there, I got it. I push these up with my thumbs to keep that up, and then just snap that down onto the top lip there. So that's your brew group, ready to go back in the machine. And putting it back in is the exact same, it's a reversal of how you took it out. And then I want to make sure it's in the home position. So we'll go to do that part next. I'm going to clean and vacuum out all of this before I reassemble it. And also, I think I had a leak here at this water inlet valve, so I'm probably going to replace that. I've never taken that apart before, but I think it'll be easy enough to get that apart. And I do know that I've got a spare gasket for this water inlet. Now this is a pressure regulator valve right here, and I'm replacing it. I took the old one out, and I'm putting a new one in. It just uses the Torx screw that goes through here and threads into there. These things fail all the time, and it's easy and cheap to do it. This is the thing that, that water hose that we took off earlier in the video that comes up from the brew group through the little hole in the wall there and went in to here. So I'm replacing that just for good measure. So I've replaced that pressure pop-off valve. Here's the inlet hose that goes into it. And I'm going to put a fresh O-ring on there and then put it in the valve and then put the hairpin clip in there. So I put the water hose back in and put in the hairpin clip after putting the fresh O-ring on there. And then back at the beginning in the video, we had taken that other tube out of here. And when I reinstall that water tubing, I'll put a fresh O-ring on there also. Now this is the piece inside that valve that's supposed to go in here. It goes in there like that. And it's supposed to be in one piece, but it's broken. And frequently they are broken from what I understand. So you can get this piece, but as far as I'm concerned, just buying the whole assembly like I showed over here before. I didn't show it very good there, but anyway, it's there. I showed it before. Just get the whole assembly and change it out. They're cheap, it's easy to do. Now this thing had been leaking, I'm quite certain. I popped the tubing free and took it apart, and it was all caked up. Well, there's a bunch of calcium you can see here. That came from somewhere, so I'm sure this thing was leaking. So I popped it out. Now on the bottom of it, it's got two little pins. There and there. If you push those pins, you can get this assembly to come out. So I pushed those pins, these two pins, out from the bottom where they were in these holes. Push the pins and pop this piece out. So now I can get in there and change that gasket. There's the gasket right there. I just pulled it out with a hook, and I'm going to replace that with a fresh gasket. Maybe that'll fix my leak. All right, so I took care of that. I pulled this hose off, pushed these pins, got this apart, put in the new orange seal. Then when I put all this back together, I greased up those pins so that when I pushed them in, they'd go real easy. And we'll reinstall that after putting the new brew group back in. So here's the brew group put back together. I put my water line back in there with my hairpin clips. That water line's going to feed through that hole right there. I put the drive gear back on there, and with this water valve out of the way and that coffee chute out of the way, I can easily feed this water line. Now make sure the water line goes through this little notch here. As you feed it through the hole, it'll pop out the other side. You can reach over to the other side and kind of guide it. Give it a little pull, and then drop this into position, your brew group. And as you get it in position, you want to make sure you can look through the front of the machine down through here to make sure that that water hose is in that slot. Let me check it. Yeah, it is. Here, I'll secure this brew group with one screw so that we can show that. If I can find my T15, there it is. I'm going to take one screw and secure this brew group into position. And get it to get up there. There. I'm just going to loosely secure it. And now I'll show you. Hopefully you can see in there, down in there. Let me see if this is in the frame. Yeah, I think it is. I've got that water hose going through that little slot of this part of the brew group frame, going through that hole to pop out the other side over here. So now I can go ahead and put the other fasteners and secure that brew group into position. Now, when you put your fasteners in from this side, your T15 fasteners, don't tighten them, because remember, you got to go around to the other side and put in those T20 button head screws. So just lightly put this in position, go around to the other side, put in your button heads, then come back to this side and tighten these up. So I'm on the other side now, and at the other end of my magnetic, you can see that brass boss there. That's where the top T20 button head screw goes. And down under here, I don't know if I can show it. I'm going to try. But back behind this tubing, you can just see the brass of the fitting for the other Torx 20 button head screw right back there. Right above this thing here is called the encoder. But you can see it there. I'll move the yellow wire a little. This thing's pretty stiff, but there it is. That's where your other T20 button head screw goes. So hopefully you'll remember from earlier in the video, most of these brew groups are only held in by this bottom screw. There's usually not one up there up above. And then there you can see back in there, I put that screw, but I didn't put one up above up here. But I did go ahead and see if I can show it down in there. I put this bottom one right here. Let me get that in focus. That bottom one. I put that in. Oh, even though it wasn't there when I took the machine apart, I went ahead and put it back, or put one in there. So I got all those fasteners tight, the T20's on the other side, and the T15's over here. Now, put your coffee outlet tube back in the spout, and let's see what I did with my cup. Here it is. Now, when you put this coffee chute back in place, push it down. Try to get it down there. It's giving me a little trouble. There. But one thing you might want to do, shove a rag in here before you put that screw in right there. In case you flip the screw in there, you don't want to drop the screw down into there and have to tear this apart to get that out. So block that off and then put your T10 in there. You may remember at the beginning I didn't have a T10 in there, and I don't really need one, but I've got a spare laying around. I'm going to go find it and put it in there. Now it's time to put the water inlet assembly back in place. And as I said, there's a tab here that goes there. This tab here goes on that little standoff. This tab here goes on that little standoff. Just put that back together. So that tab, and that tab all go down. And then you re-secure it with your Torx 15 right there. So there's the final securing of that screw to hold this water inlet assembly in place. Like I said before, when you screw into plastic, just get it, touching and then stop. Don't overdo it. So we overhauled the brew group. We changed out the pressure over relief valve, or over pressure valve, new O-rings. Oh yeah. And that from the brew group needs to go into right there with a new O-ring on there. I'll do that right now. There's the fresh O-ring, all lubed up and ready to go. I'll maneuver this into position. I want to go underneath that wire. And then, you may not be able to see this, but I'm going to get this tubing to go up into that valve. And push it home all the way. You can't see it on video, but if you look to that little slot where the hairpin clip goes, you can see when you've got it pushed far up enough. And so I'll put the hairpin clip back there. Or try to anyway. Sometimes it's a little bit of a trick getting these hairpin clips to go in. You have to get the hose pushed all the way up so that that little brass fitting is deep in there so that this won't hit the brass. And I can see that it's up in there. I just don't know why it doesn't go easier. It's easy to drop these hair, there it goes. Okay, so now the hairpin clip is in place. This is the tube, this is the boiler, and the water comes out of the boiler, goes through that tube into this valve, and then from here it goes over to the brew group. Now, a lot of times you might want to change out this membrane regulator because it's a common failure point. And if it fails, it'll leak. You'll have water on the table underneath your machine up here by the front corner. And I'm not going to change this one out for this video, but it's an easy thing to do. You take these rubbers right here and you shove them this way, and there's a flange you can shove them over. It's hard to do. You have to get a big screwdriver and put it in there and push this till this rubber pops out of this boss and this piece of rubber pops out of this boss, and then you can pull the pump out and this membrane regulator just unscrews. You pull out the hairpin clip, take the tubing out. You can pull this out just enough to unscrew this membrane regulator, and then you put a new one on there and then reattach your hose and your hairpin clip. When you put these rubber feet back in here, clean them really good and then hit them with some lube, because usually in here it's real dirty and filthy and the rubber's dry. But once you pull these rubbers out and you clean them off and you hit them with some lube, then they're going to slide back in to these bosses way easier. I just replaced this membrane regulator about 14 months ago, so I'm going to leave it alone. But that's a common place to have a leak. And whenever I buy a new machine, a new old machine, which I buy old ones all the time, I just routinely replace that because I have no idea what the condition of it is when I buy a used machine. This was a used machine, and when I rebuilt it 14 months ago, I put in that new membrane regulator. There's videos somewhere on YouTube that'll show you how to do it if my explanation wasn't sufficient for you. Now this side panel's ready to go back on there. And remember, you've got these little tabs that fit in these little notches on the bottom, and it's easiest to get those engaged if you have the bottom of the machine, overhanging your work surface or lifted up so that you can easily get these tabs. You can visualize yourself putting that tab into that slot so that you can get this piece hard flat up against the machine. So you can't see me doing it, but I'm watching myself put those tabs in those slots. So these tabs are in the slots. This panel is hard up against the machine. And now all you have to do to put it back together is make sure that this piece is flush and this is flush against the bottom. And you just push it this way. That's it. That's back together for that side. Now we've got the same scenario here on the water tank side. You've got these little tabs that fit in these little slots. So you want to visualize yourself slipping those tabs into those slots as you put this thing up, and make sure that the bottom here is flush hard up against this bottom edge, and it's the same thing as the other side. So I'm watching myself put the tabs into the slots here. I'm visualizing myself do it there. So these tabs are in these slots, and I've got this side panel pushed firmly against the bottom edge of the machine, and just going to push forward. That's it. It's back together. No, I don't think I'll show the rest. You just put the top back on in reverse of how you took it off at the beginning of the video. But that's it. It's done. Make sure when you put the top back on, you don't knock these rubber pieces out of whack. Make sure they're on where they belong. I'm gonna have to reinstall that one because I knocked it loose showing it to you, but be sure those are, set properly before you put the top back on. Now make sure as you put the top back on, these tabs go inside of here. Don't have them hanging out on front. Make sure that tab goes right behind there so that that oval head screw can secure into there. So I've got that tab behind here, and that tab is behind here, and that is properly in position. So I can reinstall my oval head screws, and then those torque screws that go up here. Let me put that in focus. Yeah, and the other one on the other side. If you're an experienced DIYer, you know this. When you're putting multiple screws in an assembly, just get them all started, but don't tighten any of them down until they're all started. So I'm going to put all 4 oval head screws, both of the torque screws that go in the tops, get them all started, then tighten them down. Don't tighten any of them down all the way until they're all started. You probably know that. Now typically when I overhaul these, before I button it back up, before I put the sides on, I leave that side off. I put this side on so I can put a water tank in there. And I leave the top off, and I run and make some coffee so that I can watch in there to make sure that there's no leaks. Now I button this thing completely back up. That's not my typical method. I would suggest that you do what I said. Once you're done, put everything back together, but leave the bean side off, leave the top off, put this side on so you can get a water tank in there, and then brew some coffee while you're watching, from this side, looking in there to make sure that everything's working properly. Because if it's not, you got to tear it all back apart again, which isn't that hard, but if you do it the way I said, it makes your life a little easier. So that's it, we're done. Hopefully. I'll put the other parts back together. It's late right now. Tomorrow morning, I'll brew up a test cup and we'll see how it works.